You're muted. I can't hear you.
Okay, so Alicia was here. She just disappeared. Oh, there you are. Okay, just let me put out the fires here. There we go. Now we're gonna have a whole whack of people jumping up here.
Did you figure it out? That was there an issue with it or what?
Some people are saying that because there's a password on there, there's something that's happening between Eventbrite and Zoom about the sharing of the password. That's why I posted it. So I just put it on my thing. So I'm saying that's code it is, but it's still set that nobody can like jump up and say anything unless okay, hang on. So I think this is a good case for getting rid of Zoom Business and going with just Zoom. Oh, everybody's asking here.
We're getting attendees.
Yeah, they're asking here. But it should have told them that. Okay, we're already 10 minutes late.
How much time do you want to give it to let people show up?
This is weird. I don't know what the heck's going on. Why is nobody coming in? Now, here's the thing. Jeez, I don't know what to do. Where is everybody? There's no waiting room.
It says you have to register with Eventbrite when I tried to get on.
Really? Okay, I am registered with Eventbrite, and everybody is registered. Okay, here's somebody else coming in. Okay, so it's working. I posted it on my profile, so I hope people see my profile. Nothing like Hey Jules, how did you get in? What did it say?
Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah. Yeah.
No, I said the link like 3 times and finally got in through the link you sent. I had to copy and paste it and put it in.
I think what's happening is too many people trying to get in at once. Because I'm getting some messages there. I'm getting some technical messages here from Eventbrite and Zoom here. So
Crazy.
oh, too many people, that's all. Because the one portion oh. Well, they should, well, they'll just come in, so. Anyway, let's give it until 20 after.
Okay.
I gotta answer to all these things here. I gotta answer to all these messages.
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Okay, sounds good, sounds good. Just like, oh God. Oh. I wonder if, we got Pretendians working at Zoom. I know, I'm just kidding. Who knows? Who knows? What's going on here? You know what? But hey, we can still record. We'll just go ahead and what I could do is we'll just go ahead and as long as my speakers are on, I'm good. We'll just record it anyway, as if there's 17 million people. And then I'll post the recording, which I'm going to repost the recording anyway on our Zoom. I'm just getting overrun with messages.
I'm just gonna go run and get my orange t-shirt. I'll be right back.
Okay, yeah. Anyway, a whole bunch of people will probably drop in. They keep trying.
Yeah, I got in through the link that you sent me directly to in my messenger. And I didn't have to put in a password.
Okay. Well, it should be there, so people will just jump on, I think, once they see that. Okay, Jordy, you're there. So we're just waiting for Trevino. And Trevino was supposed to speak first, eh? According to our agenda.
On your agenda, it says KJ's first.
All right, so it's 1:14. How will we just go ahead? Because the links I posted on my profile are starting to work. So now everybody's starting to come in. So we'll start exactly at 1:15 and we'll just push everything back 15 minutes. And we are set to go. We are we can, overflow. It's set up for 3 hours. So if everybody wants to stay for 3 hours, they're more than welcome to stay for 3 hours. And I think what happened is that one section was sold out. So and then I kept getting requests. So we're good. We're good. I think people will start showing up now.
Yeah, I see a couple participants here.
Yeah, and so me and Cheyenna will be the moderators who will. I'll keep an eye on the questions and in the chat, and then I'll send them to you by chat, or you can see them too. But between you and I, we will unmute participants at the end for the question period. Nice background, Jules. Very nice. Where you at? I know.
This is Duke Redbird's camp on the island.
Oh wow, it's gorgeous there. It's gorgeous up here in Semaganis. I'm in the basement though here on Bear Island.
Yeah, he's got his Wikimon parked right here.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, no.
Yeah, and he's actually coming down. So he didn't tell me, but he's coming down here. He should be here in about an hour.
All right. So, let's start the meeting. It's in your little paws, your trusty little paws there, Cheyenne.
All right. Give me 1 second, just taking a note here. All right, Dansen Tutemek, Cheyenna Sapp, Nitsigasut. Managosisochinia. My name is Cheyenna Sapp. I'm from Little Pine First Nation in Treaty 6 territory, Nehio-Squaw. I'm a Plains Cree woman. I am a stand-up comedian and actor full-time by day and an advocate by night for Indigenous representation. I have a bachelor's degree in Indigenous Studies from the University of Saskatchewan. I earned that in the spring of 2023. And ever since getting into this industry that I'm in, which is, you know, acting and stand-up comedy, I'm a big pusher for authentic Indigenous representation in public spaces. I've studied a lot about representation in history. I've learned all about the creation of the Hollywood Indian from non-Indigenous people, and this representation, this image of us, still prevails to this day. And it's one of the things that I really like to speak about, how Indigenous peoples make up what percent of the population. I would say 7, 10, it varies. And we make up about 2% of representation in media. And of that 2%, you know, what percentage of that is space that's taken up by pretendians? Right. So some of the questions that I like to ask are, why are pretendians getting clout in public areas like that? You know, is it because they're palatable? Is it because they're presenting images of what other non-Indigenous people have created, and then people are relating to that? I don't know. It's a lot of factors. And so today we want to speak to our experience with First Nation, Métis, and Inuit identity fraud and its impact on reconciliation. And today's panel tagline is "Reconciliation without truth is performative and inauthentic." We want attendees to learn and to be inspired. So today we will bring you your first speaker, Mr. KJ McCusker. And yeah, take it away.
Sure. Thank you very much for that introduction. That was really informative. I appreciate the work that you do and the fact that you're involved and assisted in hosting this event. So thank you for that. Tapwe. My background, I grew up in Calgary. I was born in Edmonton. I was abandoned in a hospital called the Royal Alex when I was even born, basically. And then they kept me in like basically, I don't know, like foster care orphanage for a year, and I was adopted out. But I was never able to, they didn't give my father the opportunity to take me back to our community. So he was sort of cut out of the picture. So I was kind of scooped in a weird way, just straight out of the hospital. And he's from Fort Simpson. We're Dene. His mother is Inuvialuit from Inuvik. His father's Deneko from Fort Simpson. So that took 30 years to find out where the hell I come from. So like growing up in Calgary, being an Indian in Calgary, being a half-breed, you know, everyone says, well, what kind of Indian are you? And you don't know. It's kind of like, there's like this like cockeyed look you get from people, and then you grow up in the city. So I've seen a lot. I'm 55 years old now. I work for the last 25, well, a long time. I've worked a long time in the Indigenous communities across Ontario and Canada. I've worked on developing the Kishi Anishinaabe and a Kind Man campaign for violence against women. I've been a strong proponent. That's through the Ontario Federation of Indian Friendship Centers. In case anyone knows, it's a really great program. I worked very hard on helping them develop the communications model for that for the better part of 15 years. It's a long project and it's still ongoing. Then, you know, missing and murdered Indigenous women work, working with a number of the hospitals, a number of different communities across pretty much mostly Ontario. Most recently working with Fort Severn on reestablishing a perception of reclaiming their own education system and developing programming for choosing life, you know, anti-suicide. I was extremely involved in trying to develop communications and understand standards of communications, and even the research for where are we at with why negative adult influence is our number one contributor to child suicide. So these are pretty heavy, deep issues, and I'm pretty committed to it. The Pretendian stuff, that is something that I've seen throughout my entire life. And just to give you some context, because I'm old, we used to have like white guys come up onto the powwow when I was a kid, full makeup, like paint their face red, and then go all out with full regalia. Like even sometimes come into the powwow with like you know a chief's buckskin with like frickin' headdress, like pretty intense stuff. Like when you think about that, and at that time, most of the elders I remember then were kind and gentle about it. They weren't like, get the hell out of here. They wouldn't kick you out. I even had one incident in California when I was attending a spiritual ceremony with the Pala Indians outside of Los Angeles, where one of the Pala elders engaged with a guy who came to the powwow dressed like he came out of the costume attire of the theater performance of Cats. So he had his whole face painted like a cat, and he had these crazy feathers, and he had this like the most insane regalia I've ever seen in my life. And there was these two sort of hard-knuckled Indians, like big guys, that were just looking at him like, oh, like I could read their mind. They're like, we're gonna fucking take this guy, we're gonna chain him up to the back of our truck, and we're gonna drag him the hell out of here. Like, who the hell is this clown? And then that elder, he picked up on that vibe, and he engaged with this crazy maniac to teach him how to dance. It was the most heartwarming thing. It made me come to tears, actually, because it was profound. It was like a profound statement of kindness. But that's a hard pill to swallow when we're constantly having our space taken from us. And I don't dismiss that elder's message because it's a powerful one. But at the same time, like, why would we want to encourage that type of behavior? We can't encourage that kind of behavior. That's absolutely unacceptable. And that's what brought me to writing on the subject. So I wrote for the Toronto Star, explaining my personal theory that this is a violence. It's a form of violence. And it's a slap in the face to us when you misrepresent yourself as one of us. It causes such a wild chain of events. And back in, when I was a kid, these people would pose as us like it was an event, like they wanted to capture a piece of our spirituality and get a piece of that experience of being a participant. But that's transitioned into capitalizing on our positioning, and which is something we've never really done. It's not like a native thing. So you sort of see all these people now really becoming outspoken about this issue, and for good reason. I think there needs to be more involvement among your local community chiefs, representing us on a broader scale. There needs to be more representation within the federal level, the provincial level, the community level, the civic level. It's like another problem that we have to solve. And really, this is a white person's problem to solve. Like this is their problem. They should be roping in their own people, and they're not really doing that. I'm not really sure where I want to take this any further than maybe passing this along, unless there's something else to add to that.
Okay, thank you so much. That was really informative and interesting. It kind of reminds me of when you mentioned there was the person who was wearing the cat makeup and stuff like that. And then somebody reached out in an act of kindness and taught them how to dance. That was really heartwarming. It kind of reminded me of when I have a joke in my set about Pretendians, and it gets mixed reactions. The joke, some of you might have seen it, but I say, I start out by explaining what a Pretendian is, right? So when a Pretendian is a non-Indigenous person who pretends to be Indigenous so they can get some of our lovely benefits. And then I pause And I say, okay, well, take their kids then. And this gets mixed reactions,
Right.
right? Because like one, like people know that Pretendians do not have that Indigenous experience. And number two, we all understand the gravity of taking kids away from their families. Like that is unfortunately an Indigenous experience. And so that's why it gets the mixed reactions. But I kind of like will soften the blow by saying, well, we're going to give them back. And it's a joke that I know it makes people uncomfortable. But
Yeah.
it's also so ridiculous. And it points out, like, again, I said to the fact that Pretendians do not have, like, they have experiences, but they're not Indigenous experiences.
Did you know, it's funny that you say that because it reminds me of an actual, like a real incident where George Washington, in his own letters, when they were having embarkment issues with encountering natives, that we would often steal their kids so that we would have a chip to play. And this is a real story. He wrote it in a letter because he had this big concern, like how do we undo this? Because every time that they would recover a child taken from us, the child would run away and come back to us. Isn't that wild? And so like he was literally talking about how do we convert them back into their way of living, because once they lived like us, they didn't want to live like anything else. So there's this long, engagement of a history of them wanting to capture what our perception of the world. And I think that has a great deal to do with it, not just the occupation, not just the stealing of land, not just it's a whole package. Anyway, so that's because your joke has some gravity to it. There's some truth to that.
Yeah, that's a really powerful statement that you said. Not about me, but
George Washington. Yeah.
Yeah. So if any attendees, anybody in attendance has questions, there will be a Q&A period after everybody's finished speaking, and you may answer questions in the chat. We will go through the chat later on with the Q&A section. All right. So we'll go on to the next. Did Trevino get here? Oh, there he is. Our next speaker is Trevino Brings Plenty, and you can start with a short intro and then take it away.
Thank you. Good to be here. I'm finally getting into this space. I learned to do all my things, not to get too frustrated. This is part of doing like tech stuff. It's kind of nice to have that frustration tolerance there. But yeah, it's great to be here. Hopefully other folks are feeling okay with what's going on today. I know the U.S. doesn't really have the Orange Shirt Day, but it's picking up like a lot of things that happen in Canada. It's in different pockets, so it's being observed in different areas here in the United States as well. So my name is Trevino Brings Plenty, Minikoja Lakota. I'm enrolled in Cheyenne River Sioux tribe, part of the Ocheti Shakowin. Of course, with that is, I have different other relatives in other tribes or reservations here in the South Dakota area. I'm located in the Portland, Oregon. Been here for a while and doing stuff out here. So one thing I focus in on is labor rights, and that I feel and I think this is a labor issue. As much as we want to say the social stuff is happening there, yeah, that is there too. But for me, it comes down to labor issue. So knowing that, social relationships turn into labor relationships, can turn back into social relationships. So that can be you're out in the community doing stuff, or you're out visiting someone's nation doing stuff that's a social event, but then you put other institutions around and you have a job, you get hired for something, now turns into labor relations, and they can go back and forth that way. So I think what I think about in terms of I'm going to say Indians because I'm going to focus on that. For Indians, it's trying to find ways to better their conditions and acknowledge where we are right now, and either in Canada, United States, of that we, as folks who have to sell our labor for a wage, we're in competition with other folks to do that. And a lot of Native folks have created pathways for other Native folks to get into different institutions or job opportunities that are being usurped by pretendians or folks who have these false claims. And so it directly takes money away from Native folks, from Indians directly. And whether it is on the individual level or as we see it expand into fake tribes, fake orgs that other folks don't know that they're fake, they then tap into other funds. We're seeing that with the Eastern Métis folks as well, those different organizations there in Canada. And here in the United States, we have that as well, a lot of fake tribes. There's 3 federally recognized Cherokee tribes, and there's like 100 or so fake Cherokee tribes. These are what we call corporations posing as Indian nations, sea-paying groups. They're a nonprofit organization, cultural heritage organization. They're not Native nations. And I think that's really important. Even here, the adoption of saying they are citizens of whatever nation it is, and it's a nonprofit. And it's just as, if you're a member of any kind of organization, you're a member of that organization, it doesn't mean you have that citizenry for the nation. And trying to stay more focused on the political side of our distinct reality, different from just having some kind of ancestry. It's more than that. We enact, whether through treaty rights or in relationship to land and people, that is tied to also where we are now and our relationship within living memory too. So my grandparents can talk about their grandparents. That's a connection to that relationships within 6, 7 generations. It's not something where you have been so disconnected you have no connection to that. If you have a claim or a root ancestor in the 1700s, it's not that. And even that is a stranger coincidence or a stranger approach to have claim for Native everything existence that is being used. So focusing on the labor side of it, here in the States, we have something called the Indian Preference in Hiring. And that's a ordinance that says, if you have a job opened up and it's directly for a Native person, you can enact labor, or you can enact Indian preference in hiring. And what that does is you can ask for documentation for their claim. And so that also says that you are, if not enrolled in your nation, then at least your grandparent was enrolled, and that's how you show the descendancy. And again, keeping in line with the political status that is there, that connection that's there. So that would be the definition for the descendancy that may be there for the Indian preference in hiring. Doesn't mean, it doesn't guarantee the job. You still have to be able to do the job. It just gives those extra points of like, actually, we're looking at, if we want to put in equity terms for Native folks, what that equity is, this is trying to recruit those folks there. So here in the States, you can't hire based off of race, class, nationality, whatnot. Indian preference is, and that's Title IX. Indian preference in hiring is exempt from that. You can ask the questions for documentation. And I think that's really important. And that can be expanded other places too, like the fear of asking for documentation. For a lot of Native folks, depending on their circumstances, they're pretty well documented. And then, as we start to change the culture right now that, we're looking at genealogy as this other avenue, now that we have access to those kind of public documents, we can start to back up these claims or see there if anything is there or not. And for Native folks, Native ancestry just pops up right away within 3 generations. You're talking about something that's actually there, documented. And that's distinctly different from settlers who, can all the way go back to New France or back to their European countries, whatever that may be. So we're changing the culture around this issue for everyone to come on board and say, this is, if you're not enrolled in a federally recognized tribe, if you're not enrolled in these nations, then, let's look at the genealogy that's there. So for me, understanding this Indian preference in hiring, we can, once we start to change the culture and everyone has a sense of like, actually, we can ask these questions. We shouldn't be afraid of that. And I think it might be a little bit different in Canada with those stipulations of things they're asking, but our positions are politically different. At least here in the States, we're on the same, our federally recognized tribes negotiate and discuss with the federal government, and no need to talk with the states themselves. And in fact, tribes are in they're in direct competition with the states. They're at that level where actually they're above states and actually above the United States as well. So we're acknowledging that in that position. So for me, as I started to look at this issue of pretendianism seriously in 2018, when I started to get when an issue came up and trying to process it, and what I've noticed is, there's a learning curve that happens when you take this approach. In order for me to understand something, I have to know what is the law of contradictions. Both things are there, the positive and the negative. What is and what isn't are both present. In this case, looking at Native folks, the issues that come up with a job or like a book deal or any kind of gig, what that may be, we're seeing how easy it is to just make up stuff and how institutions start to validate that. Folks who have false claims, they can validate that through the institutional powers that are there that legitimize these false claims. And whereas us as Indians are pushing back and saying, no, these folks aren't, they don't not only not represent their own nation that they're coming from, they're just lying. And with that, as a labor issue, what the pretendian does within these institutions or these job opportunities, they create chaos. They make a toxic environment for natives to work well in. It's already challenging enough to work within institutions with the other labor issues that are there, but now we have a distinct difference in that the person with the false claim has protections because now they're protected class because of the false claim, but that's not there. They're just like any other non-Indian that's there. But other non-Indians support the pretendian, and then the Indians who are unmasking the pretendians are seen as the bad Indians. They're not the good Indians. They're not going along and maintaining the status quo. And so in that way, they are then pushed out. And so it becomes these places that Native folks have created pathways for other Native folks to do well or try out these other opportunities that have been usurped by the pretendian. They now continue to push them out. It's settler colonialism with its new face in aesthetics and operations and tactics that are through the pretendian itself. And also in looking at this, of course, I operate from a perspective of quantity changes quality. So quality right now of pretendianism is protecting them. We need to get enough quantity to change that quality to say, no, this is we want something different. So we have to show all these numbers. So folks may have some kind of criticism or critique that why are these individuals being unmasked, whatever. We need the quantitative data to change the quality of pretendianism or our conditions in relation to pretendianism. So it's important that we keep having more and more individuals unmasked, put out there just to show the full force of how pretendianism and continued settler colonialism from an interior perspective that the false claim has for non-Native folks, to show how we need to change that to better our conditions. And with that kind of agitation or whatever that may be to want to just dismantle, deconstruct pretendianism, there's going to be so much violence against Indian folks who are doing that directly. And so and so for folks who are doing this work, there's a lot of folks that are behind the scenes as well. and that they're members or folks who are helping out with this issue that know the full threat, not only with the Pretendian directly, but their institution that's there, and also what we may call defendians that, aid in the perpetuation of this false claim for whatever reason that may be. Not going to go into too much on defendians themselves, but there's something there. So we're going against colonial institutional powers, and not only colonial institutional powers, but when you think about any kind of social justice movement, we can't separate that from labor justice as well. And with that, an economy that fuels the whole thing. So if there was no money going on here, the kind of competition that we're in, wouldn't be so necessarily important, right? But for Native folks, especially if I'm thinking about what's called the reserve army of labor, the underemployed, unemployed folks who, want to better the conditions, even if they go out and find a job, this group is able to better the conditions through what has been created for them, or these opportunities that are there. I think what Pretendians actually show is there is opportunity out there, accolades or whatever, if you want to do all that stuff, but mostly focused in on making sure your material conditions are met, making sure you have housing, making sure you have, somewhat subsidized healthcare. There in Canada and States, we have none. And so that kind of, healthcare, housing, access to food, access to clean water, things that would have been provided in a great society if we lived in a great society, but we don't, right? And so we're trying to better our conditions through the means of selling our labor for a wage, which unless you come for money, then you're a different position than we who have to sell our labor for a wage in those direct competitions. And I think for those Native folks who are combating, agitating against Pretendianism. Good example is Ghost Warrior Society in the United States. There's the Tribal Alliance Against Frauds, combating them. You can see the direct attacks there through other colonial institutions that attack them directly, right? Or try to remove any kind of financial support from them, or legally try to attack them for issues of defamation. But I think it's really important to know that even if someone tries to prove defamation on these Pretendians, well, first they have to prove their claim is true. And for most lawyers, they would initially do a demand letter. It's like $500. It's quick money for them. They don't care what it is. And so anyone can do a demand letter or whatever these initial legal things are. But if they actually want to prove defamation, they have to show things are said untrue, knowingly said untrue. And with that is these Pretendians have to show they are actually what the claim they have are stating. And we can also see examples here in this live contemporary issue of Pretendianism, how institutional powers continue to uphold Pretendians. The METLE, Michelle, whatever their name is, the lawyer. Now they're part of a lawyer guild, and the lawyer guild now took their DNA and said this is enough here to say that their claim is true. Now that is going against Native nations. Now you have this institutional power that has the threat of legal, whatever that is. I think this poses great threat to tribal sovereignty when these other institutions are upholding their Pretendian for whatever reason. And then we can get into actually DNA is not a good substitution for tribal claims at all. It may be good for paternity and directly for who's all here, but knowing that a lot of DNA tests are based off of current populations, it may show some kind of link to a cousin, does not actually show historically where your folks have been. It may suggest some things, but that's not a definitive science that says you are from this group of people. That's where the genealogical research comes in. And with that, we can see for a claim, it needs evidence behind it. Native folks, we do our genealogy, it's there, evidence there. For these Pretendians, pull the genealogy and show that it's not there, then it's not there. And for folks who are not on some kind of mental health spectrum, they're like, oh, sorry, I'm good. I was misinformed. I'm pulling back, what have you. But for folks who, maybe in some kind of spiral with their identity crisis, that they'll lash out. And this is not normative behavior on that level. And so we're dealing with folks who, whatever the dark triad spectrum may be, they'll start to be intensified through the act of unmasking them. And for folks who have worked in social services or who have worked with domestic violence, we totally understand what this looks like for dealing with batterers, right? And so all those things that come along with batterers and making, gaslighting the victims of pretendianism in this place, or what that may be in terms of having access to whatever the job may be. And when I focus more on the labor side of it, for anyone who has to sell their labor for a wage, their job is life and death. Their job, provides food, housing, all the things, material conditions. So when you're in an environment where you have toxic pretendianism rampant, for a lot of folks, they don't want to say anything. So the act of being coerced to sell our labor for a wage continues to be coerced by pretendians, either pushing folks out or just creating the toxic, unhealthy environment for Indians to try to thrive and better the conditions. This way, we can see directly in front of everyone as they continue this, creating this toxic environment. In front of everyone, we get to see how their settler racism is pretty blatant against Indians, and all the things that settler colonialism upholds, and making sure Indians continue to be oppressed and subjugated by the colonial powers that be, aided by the fire of capitalism, of course, right? The economy that is driving that. As much as they want to exterminate us and remove us from our connection to land, it has continued our fight to have those connections to land, and of course, with that, all the things that make our existence, or ontology, or whatever you want to say, with the epistemologies that go along with the more academic terms. But, in trying to further define our existence, I have three categories that inform it. So it'll be geography, culture, and ancestry. If the ancestry is there, culture and geography can move around. We've moved around a lot. That's always there. But without the ancestry, those connections to geography and culture turn into different things. And in this case, we can see what those different things are by these fake groups, or these corporations posing as Indian Nation sea-paying groups, that they are cultural heritage groups that, like any kind of group that has a thing that's going on, right? They can do cultural things and say all that, but without the ancestry, that connection to those things resonates different. And for Native folks, we not to essentialize it, but there's a common understanding or sense of self that is incorporated in relationship to land, in relationship to our ancestors, in relationship to the cultural practices that informed how we view and interact with each other on that side. So the social side, the social relationships that come along with that are really important. But also, even knowing this idea of talking about kinship relationships, like any kind of social construct, kinships can be developed and continue to thrive and have those connections, but they also can be severed, right? So, and of course, hopefully it's not through the institutional powers or colonial powers that makes that kind of severance. But for folks who, this is why I'm more speaking of folks who manipulate the adoption systems that we may have within our kinship networks. So for Lakota people, we have a hunka ceremony, so the making of a relative ceremony, and we can see that our cultural practices are then manipulated to benefit the pretendian to continue to disrupt Indians' lives by having an outsider come in through making of a relative ceremony, and all the things that go along with that. So for the non-Indian, these kind of ceremonial rituals or connections are really for the resource gain to the materials themselves, not so much to the benefit of the Indians around them. So we see that over again as they post everywhere. I do this. I'm with a ceremonial family. I maybe even enrolled in a fake tribe now because non-Indians don't know much about Indians. Indians barely know much about Indians, and now they just take the bare surface level of a fake tribal claim from, even if they're enrolled in a fake tribe, as legitimized. Now they can have the accoutrements that aid in the performance of their pretendian false claim. So the hunka ceremony in our case would be more of a resource acquisition than an actual connection to the people there to benefit them, as they are not living with those people predominantly. That's a different thing than if, they come in for, the summer ceremonies and then bounce throughout the rest of the year and just talk all the things. So I think yesterday or the other day, there was another event that happened, and they called it like drive-by culture sharing or whatever it is. So they're just there to pop in, get their credentials and bounce, very very Western construct of how they may engage or add on, embellish their own claims of whatever it is, the feathers, the leathers, whatever that may be. These accreditations through direct ties to people is part of that. And I mean, if they're living with a family themselves, that's a whole different thing. They're actually there in the community doing stuff. They're not pushing it out there for book deals or, other jobs at universities that, ideally should center Native folks in those positions. So we can see these tactics that are used, and I thought about this in terms of the Pretendian weaponizes our existence against us. And so all aspects of us are being weaponized against us in order to shut us down. And it's unfortunate that we have what we call Defendians who, bless their hearts, are doing the best they can to do whatever to contain their reality, but actually is counterproductive to our own bettering of our own conditions. And then just, of course, supports the Pretendians' false claim. And, for folks who are unmasking Pretendians, creating a very hostile existence. And of course, for ourselves, that is in the labor relationships, that's all there. I don't get too much into the spiritual side. I mean, the hunka ceremony is tied into spiritual side. I don't speculate too much on that. I wonder about things like that, like if our ancestors pop in and see like this Washichu coming in there and like what's this guy doing here? But that's a different conversation that's happening. I would like other folks to, on top of this, think of this in terms of labor relations. Think of this in terms of folks selling their labor for a wage. And of course, within labor are all the things that make us in order to do the job we have to do. So those cultural knowledges, those skills and abilities are things that we have developed within our own capabilities, but is in connection to our people who we come from as well. So the labor itself, and then of course, as we sell that for making sure we get our needs met, because this is our conditions now, that we frame this all as a labor issue. And this becomes another thing of like, there is unionism that is there, but unions don't know or don't want to grasp what this actually means, because now their settler colonialism starts to be unsettled in ways that they don't want to, or they minimize the issue itself, which as Native folks, we've experienced that as well, with all of our issues being minimized. So it's predictable, but it's not, it's something that we have to push back all the time. We're continuing to try to find our existence in this world, and we have to continue to push back against narratives that go against us existing in this world. And so it'll be up for us to inform labor unions that this is a labor issue. This is creating an environment in our working conditions, a toxic work environment that makes us not want to be in these positions, but then again, uphold settler colonialism. That is the purpose there. If they actually want to do changing their conditions, because I consider negative issues to be the canary in the coal mine, in that anything that happens to Native folks is expanded to the whole workforce itself. So as we know, we go into our labor issues, labor power is important. The Pretendian is there to disrupt labor power, to sow chaos, and it disrupts and doesn't better everyone's conditions. Because what happens to us happens to everyone else who are trying to fight the best way they can to better their conditions through labor actions or whatever that is. So that is important that we have that turn in our understanding of that cultural expression of understanding our conditions through labor lens itself. And so I hope folks are this is recorded, and so if folks want to take some more conversations about that, I'm totally open about this. Folks can reach out to me. In processing all this stuff, I created memes. It was a meme project. It's already been going on some time, and I recently compiled them together on my website, TrevinoBringsPlenty.com. Folks can access and see all the memes there. And if they feel they want to have a paper book of it, I compiled it into a print-on-demand book. I often thought about, actually it showed up in one of the memes from 2023 that, it'd be funny to have a Pretendian coffee table book, and here what the memes are, a Pretendian coffee table book. So folks want to get that's fine. It's at bare minimum. I'm not making any money off this stuff. I'm more for an open source culture on a lot of stuff. I'm willing to share all information I have with folks who are willing to listen and they want to, better their conditions, better understand what's going on with this issue. For Native folks, I think it's another addition onto understanding our condition, our existence, and how we interact with the world around us. And of course, in relationship to if we're doing anti-colonial work, if we're doing anti-capitalism work, this is part of that. This is coming from us directly in our conditions in these colonial projects, and that can actually signal with other folks who are dealing with the colonial projects in this kind of expression of the colonizer then self-indigenizing to continue to disrupt Native folks' existence to aid in their colonial project. So I think all the facets that come along with these issues, those are all tied together. Everything is interrelated. And what we're doing is pulling apart some of the conditions that uphold Pretendianism, or at least in this expression of settler colonialism, Pretendianism, and showing within that how faulty the whole condition, the whole colonial projects themselves are disruptive to Native folks, but actually everyone. Everyone who is Native and non-Native can have their conditions bettered. And I think that kind of building of solidarity is really important because, for non-Native folks, we need allies. Talk to your other non-Native folks. These are the ones who are doing this. It's not us. Unfortunately, it's on us to look at this issue and bring it to folks. But it's really the settler identity crisis, not our crisis. But we can highlight why it is what it is. So just listen. And then move, of course, action on stuff. Thank you.
Thank you so much. A lot of information to absorb. Thank you, Trevino. If anybody has questions for him, you can post them in the chat and we will address them at the end of the discussion. And for those of you who just joined, we really want people to learn and reflect and understand real life impacts of Pretendianism. So panelists will address it in the context of their own experiences, and we will move on to our next panelist. Oh, and this is going to be posted online. Also, if you've missed any of our speakers today, we've already heard from KJ McCusker, and Trevino Brings Plenty was just on. And next up we have Alicia Bear-Morin.
Hi to everybody. My name is Alicia Bear-Morin. I'm Cree from Treaty 6. I grew up along the Churchill River. That's where my family is from, and that's what informs my perspective as growing up there. I have a undergrad degree, an honors degree from McMaster in Indigenous Studies, and I have a Juris Doctor from Windsor Law. Both of my degrees, I've had to be in toxic environments because of Pretendians. I've had to, they they have playbooks, like it's just they can be predicted, like if you understand the tactics, it's like literally in every university. I went to McMaster with this one girl, and she told me she's from Burlington, but all of a sudden I saw her at our national Indigenous Bar Association conference later to find out she's friends with one of my colleagues' daughter, who's third would be 4th generation Métis, and they got admitted into pretty prestigious programs, and they take up a lot of space. And they're bullies. They, you know, it's going on everywhere. It's not just in one school, because I also sit as a national president to our National Indigenous Law Students Association. And the things I hear, about, like, you know, groups of white students trying to get access to sit on boards, to sit and to take up capacity where they have no lived experience, they have nothing to relate to. Because that's what we have as a Cree person, as a Cree woman. I relate to my people. I relate to my nation. And it's not like I view it as a concept of property. I view it as a relational thing, that I exist in relation to my family. I exist in relation to Creator. I exist in relation to the land, to the natural law. That's what I exist in relation to. And I carry that with me. I take that into consideration in everything that I do, all of the work that I do. And to come up against pretendians and defendians, it's hard. It's hard to go to a university, you know, being a res kid. You don't have the acquired generational wealth. You don't have the acquired skill set to live in an urban center, even, because, like, little things like bylaws, for example, you can't go to a park after a certain hour. You know, there's little things like that. Whereas at home, you could, you know, everything just, you do whatever you want. You can go fishing and you could do whatever you want. Go in the bush, whatever it is, go be out with your family and not have to deal with noise complaints. All, you know, but these things are like what separate res kids from you know, they have a different lived experience. That's my point, is that we exist for in relation to everything. We carry respect, we carry honesty, we carry integrity, we carry our responsibility to our Creator, our responsibility to our land, and we bring these perspectives when we go to school to learn about different things. For example, property law. Property law is not the way we know property. It's not the way we know our land. And it's hurtful to have to go and to hear a professor, non-native professor, talk about what it means to have a fee simple property, for example. What it means to be under the Constitution. It's hurtful to hear these things when all you ever known was treaty. All you've ever known was, you know, pristine land, nice, you know, big blueberries, moose meat in the fall time, fish in the summertime, different foods in different seasons. To have to come to like an institution with such rigidity, so much hostility, where everybody is trained to have a different mindset about property and nations and citizenship. You know, like I took a lot away from there was a presentation last week with Kim Tallbear at McEwen University. And she said that whenever possible, can we resist using the concept of identity when we prefer belonging to our peoples and territories? Can we resist individualizing and making our relatives into property that the word identity conveys? For example, instead of saying a person that was scooped lost their Indigenous identity, implying that that is an individual trait that we can own. Can we choose words and descriptions that focus on the collective and the violence done to both individuals and their nations together by another collective, the settler state, and their individual agents? We can say instead that person was stolen from their nation and forced into residential school, or they were forcibly adopted to a white family. Then we can acknowledge both the personal and structural harms as a disruption to our relations, not our identities. Because we exist in relation to our relatives, we are not claiming some sort of ownership over them. This may help us redirect the narrative away from ideas that non-Indigenous people can use to make individual claims of ownership over our so-called identities. At the same time, they make claims of ownership to our stories and our histories. Focus on what is wrong with Pretendians, the settler state, and their individual actions. Our identity is not the problem. And she talked about also the Article 2 of the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. In the present convention, genocide means the following acts committed with intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group as such, killing members, causing bodily harm, deliberately inflicting physical destruction, imposing measures to prevent births within the group, forcefully transferring children of the group to another group. And she also said, we remember the massacres, the hangings, in particular Wounded Knee, the forced sterilization of our women, seizure of our children, the horrific conditions of starvation, malnutrition, overcrowding in prisoner of war camps, and later with children in residential schools. These are all things that happened to our people that were genocidal, and they continue to happen to our people through the child welfare system, through the high incarceration rates of Native men and women in federal and provincial institutions. There isn't enough lawmaking and institutional policy reform. It has to be done all across the board. It has to be done in universities. They need to provide policy reform. They need to provide basic human rights to our people that go into that institution, into those institutions. Right now, I'm in Prince Albert, Saskatchewan, and I've had to go to the hospital every day, and I keep seeing prison guards, correctional prison guards. They just keep bringing in Native women, and I just think about our people. I think about my community and all the communities that exist under our nation. How we don't have access to justice, how we don't have lawyers, how there's no advocacy for our people. They get incarcerated for little things that should be mediated out of the court. There's not even, we don't even have proper Gladue sentencing or Gladue riders. We don't have capacity, and it's intentional because our people are worth so much in those institutions. In particular here, they make about around 200,000 for one person incarcerated per year. So I tell people around 5 men in the PA Correctional is $1 million. And how many of our men are in there? A lot of them. And they continue to go in there. And they continue to be harmed. Our communities, our families get harmed because our people have to stay there, because we don't have access to justice, because we don't have, truth and reconciliation. We don't really have the truth, because if the truth is there, then why are we not having policy reform? Follow the budget line. Where does the money go? Who's making money? Who's benefiting from us being harmed? It's an ongoing cycle. We might not be in prisoner of war camps. We might not be existing the way we did for the past 100 years. It's evolved into systems where people are paid as individual actors of the state to keep us down, to keep us harmed, to keep us in the cycle of violence. And it's up to our women. It's up to our women to stand up. It's up to our women to fight back. That's all I gotta say. We need to push back and take back our families and protect our children. That's it.
Thank you, Elysha. Sorry, that was Elysha Bear-Morin. Very, very powerful words. And yeah, it's true. I really related to the it's hard to be a res kid in university, because it really is. There's so many barriers. And that's one of the reasons that that Pretendianism appalls me. It makes me so mad, because they don't take these barriers when they take our cultures and our identities. They don't take these things that we go through as well. They just take all the good stuff. But thank you, Elysha. If anyone has questions for Elysha, you can put them in the chat, and we will add it on to the end of this when we get through all the speakers. And so next up we have Jordy Ironstar. So you can take it away, Jordy.
Ditto. Just kidding. Hamadakyabi, Jordy we talk me wasn't wagayabi. Namakota metagwabi chega kina idahambi, winkeo out de machaje. Good day, folks. My name is Jordy Santa Maria. Or just kidding. My name is Jordy Ironstar. I use any pronouns respectfully. My late mother is Crystal Cynthia Soto, and McCusker, her mother is Verna Ironstar, and that's where my last name comes from. And her parents are the late Julia Ironstar and Douglas Owatch. And Matugash, my grandfather, is the late Arnold Soto, and his parents are Alex Soto and Mabel Pretty Shield. So my relatives and my bloodline comes from Carry the Kettle Nakota Nation located in Treaty 4 territories here in Saskatchewan, so about 40 minutes southeast of Regina. And I currently live in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, and this is where I was raised. So I do have ADHD, and sometimes what I'm thinking about is like my two talking points ahead of like what's coming out of my mouth. So I actually had to like write down my talking points. But I want to start off by thanking our moderator and thanking Ghost Warrior Society for inviting me, and thank everybody here to join in on this discussion on our 4th National Day of Truth and Reconciliation. So as I mentioned, I am a Two-Spirit person, and so in having this conversation today, I really wanted to have a conversation from that lens, and that is a lot of the work that I do, whether it be provincially, nationally, and even sometimes outside of these lands colonially known as Canada. And so I have a pretty good idea of the landscape of queer Indigenous folks, and the conversation around identity is something that is very, very prevalent within the Two-Spirit community. So something that I just want to share with folks who may not be queer Indigenous folks, or who may not really understand the beyond the like very basic definition of what a Two-Spirit person is. I just want to clarify. So the term Two-Spirit is obviously English language, and a lot of times when I have conversations, when I go and work in First Nations communities or speaking predominantly to a First Nation audience, a lot of the times I get back like the feedback of, we as Indigenous people don't have like literally two spirits within us, which I agree with. And I do hear people define it in that way, and if that's what makes them comfortable, then live your life. But really it's not about that. So I think when it comes to our concepts as Indigenous people, the way that we think, the way that our perspective is on the world, we look at this English terminology like two-spirit, and we think of it in a very, very literal sense. But that being said, I think that in addition to this, a lot of times people look at, and this even happens with actual Indians. Sorry, I am using that term today, where people look at Two-Spirit people as if it's a nation, and it's not a nation. And I want to be very, very clear on that. It's not a nation. If anything, it would be a society. But as I mentioned on top, I am Nakota, and to me, I will always identify as Nakota before anything else, because I was raised in a Nakota family. I was raised by Nakota women, and so the way that I live and the way that my perspective is on the world is definitely shaped by those worldviews. And within when you look at our languages, our First Nation languages, it's far much more complex than English, and there's a lot of our teachings that are in there, and I'll give an example of this, of our word mitagina. So mitagina is your older sister, but it also means your older first female cousin. And that is because you are to treat your first cousins as your siblings. They're the same thing. So when it comes to a lot of my first cousins, I only call them my sisters. I have only called them my sisters since I was younger, like since I was a child, which confused the hell out of my husband for many years. But but anyway, so and in there is a teaching, and just that word is a teaching. And the reason why I make it very clear that Two-Spirit people are a society and not a nation is because, unfortunately, pretendians and the concept of pretendians is very, very rampant within the Two-Spirit community, because a lot of people, their claim to community are Two-Spirit people. It's not a reserve. It's not a tribe. It's not a nation. It's Two-Spirit people as a group. This is my community. This is who claims me. But you have to remember that Two-Spirit community could be, somebody might be Cree, somebody might be Sioux, somebody might be Ojibwe, so on and so forth. And so it's really important for me to make that distinction. One of the previous speakers, who I don't believe is on the call, and oh no, he's right there. Trevino made a really, really good point, which I kind of want to dive into, which was Wasijus, white people, don't know Indians, and a lot of times, sometimes Indians don't know what it means to be Indian, or I might have butchered what he said, but that is very true. Without being so black and white, but so something that I wanted to talk about today when I speak about my perspective as a two-spirit person on this issue of identity is kind of what I've been seeing laid out. And so with residential school, with the 60 scoop, with a lot of our Indigenous relatives living in urban areas, of course, there are benefits to that, education, job opportunity, housing, so on and so forth. But that also comes at a cost of having that disconnection, or not easily accessible connection to your home community, to your language, to your ceremonies. And so a lot of times we have urban Indigenous people who are really starved for that knowledge. They're starved for ceremony, they're starved for language, they're starved for teachings. A lot of our two-spirit relatives that I see and that I've met throughout my years of doing this work did not have Indian names, were not raised in a home where they spoke their language, did not have easy access to their cultural teachings, which in my opinion is their ancestral right to have. But when you have this need, when you have this large group of people who are asking for the same thing, it creates a demand, and that demand creates opportunity. So what we see happening, or what I observe happening, is that, okay, you have all of these youth asking for culture, asking for ceremony, and then we have these pretendians, or alleged pretendians, swoop in because they see the opportunity of, this is something that I can provide for them. This is something that I can get an honorarium for, and this is something that I can get, more importantly, social positioning with. And so what we see happening is people who claim to be knowledge carriers, claim to be pipe carriers, claim to be lodge keepers, who go into these spaces that are created by institutions, that are created by universities, and created by organizations who are looking for Indigenous advisory or Indigenous consultation. And these folks get into these spaces with other people who are elders, but who are like actually First Nation people who actually have teachings. And they get into those spaces and they listen and they observe and they start to take those teachings from actual Indigenous elders, or they get their very base level knowledge from the Google elders. And what happens there is then those people they start working in community, and they start working with organizations and with universities as elders. And when you mix that with a group of youth, or a group of people who are desperate to have that sense of identity brought back to them, it creates this power dynamic where, and any First Nation person would know this, is that, we are taught not to talk back to our elders. We're taught that it's very disrespectful to question our elders. And that's what we're taught at a very young age. And when you have that dynamic of not being able to question, then nobody's going to hold those pretendian elders accountable. because they're afraid that it'll come off as disrespectful or rude. And so I see that that is something that I see really prevalent within the Two-Spirit community is for one, it's people claiming to be Indigenous who are not, but their claim to community is the Two-Spirit community. And two, we have a lot of pretendians who claim to be knowledge keepers or elders who are there because it is profitable to them and because it creates a social position for them where people are looking up to them. And this is a conversation that I had with my friend just this weekend. I drove up to Prince Albert and visited a couple of my friends, and we had this conversation about pretendians because this is something that we're dealing with in the province of Saskatchewan right now. And what I've observed happen is people who claim to be elders, people who claim to be knowledge carriers, and people who claim to be lodge holders, and they're out here giving Indian names to a bunch of people who didn't have access to that. And when you give reconnecting Indigenous people, when you give them that validation of their identity, when you give them their Indian name, when you give them colors, when you give them a clan, so on and so forth, what they're doing is they're giving these reconnecting Indigenous people a real sense of identity. And the really sad, unfortunate part about that is I see what's happening, and a lot of times I stay quiet because it's just like, it upsets me, but at the same time, I don't want to bring harm to my fellow Indigenous kin and rip that identity that they were given, rip that away from them. Like that just, it feels, excuse my Nakota, but it feels shitty to do that to somebody. But at the same time, I know that it's not authentic, and that sounds horrible to say, but it's the truth. It's the truth. And so it's when I witness this happening, and when I see these conversations happening, that's what hurts the most to me as a Nakota person, as a First Nation person, is I see a power dynamic and I see an abuse of power. And the way that I look at it is, you're taking advantage of our Indigenous youth. You're taking advantage of my Two-Spirit kin by giving them this false sense of identity, and you're giving them these pan-Indigenous teachings that you've stolen from other knowledge carriers that you've been able to share space with for many, many years. And because you give that false sense of identity to our youth, those youth will protect you. They will protect you because you've given them something that they were so damn hungry for. And so trying to hold these people accountable is very difficult, and it puts you in a very difficult position, because if I were to call out one of those people, everybody who they damn gave a name to, everybody who they've invited into their lodge to, everybody who they've given a sense of identity to is going to protect them, because they've given them something that means so much value to who they are. And so it creates this position where people who are actually First Nation people, if we speak out, we're really, really putting ourselves at risk. And so I really commend Crystal and the Ghost Warrior Society, Kim Tallbear, all of these people who do this work and who put their neck out to speak the truth. And that is a big part of today, of National Day of Truth and Reconciliation. It is about truth. And it's about how pretendians, or this notion of pretendians, has created, it continues to create that history of harm to our people as First Nation people. And I can only speak from my perspective because I'm First Nation. But what I see happening is now we question each other constantly. And I used to not think about that before, but now I'm a little bit older and I have nieces and nephews who are of mixed ancestry. So I have nieces and nephews who are their features may be very Asian or features that are very white. However, that does not change the fact that they were raised by my sisters who are Nakota Crees. You know what I mean? And so I think about it that way. If somebody were to bully or attack my own nieces and nephews, like Auntie Jordy will get ranked. And but that's what happens is like if you're not racially, if somebody looks at you and you don't immediately look like a First Nation person, then you will be questioned. And I'm not really saying that that's wrong. Because if somebody were to ask me which reserve I come from, who's my mom, who are my ancestors, I can answer that in a, snap of a finger. So it's not anything that I take offense to if people ask me. But we're getting to a point where people who are actually First Nation, we can't even trust each other anymore. And we don't have, there's no trust in the words that we say anymore. When we say who we are, we can't even trust each other because that is a symptom of what pretendians have done. Because they've taken the stories of our actual Indigenous people who are 60 scoop survivors, who are residential school survivors, who have been taken from their homes through modern day child and family services. Those are very, very real stories. I know many people across this nation who were not raised in their home community, but they know who they are, but they just were not raised in their community and for reasons beyond their own control. And what I see happening is a lot of pretendians see those stories, they hear those stories, and they think, well, there's a way that where I won't be questioned. I can easily say that I was a 60 scoop survivor. I can easily say I was in residential school, and that is the reason why I don't have ties to community. And what that does, again, is it not only is a complete mockery to Indigenous people who that is their lived experience, but it also, once we catch them in that lie, then everybody who has that same story, whether legitimate or not, we're going to question because of that one liar. So that's something that I've really been observing, and these are conversations that I have in community. Sorry. So I think what this really comes down to for me in my observations is it's not just about monetary gain, but it's about societal gain. When a person is a pretendian and they're able to be a pretendian just long enough to be claimed by actual Indigenous people, then their social position within Indian country becomes a little stronger because now you have actual Indigenous people claiming them. But and that makes it more difficult for them to be called out. And we've seen that happen time and time again from very famous cases. And like some of those, for example, I believe Carrie Barassa, to be honest, I didn't read much into it because I can care less about a fake Indian. But when people say that they're married into a nation, that's not a thing. That it doesn't change the fact. Like for example, I have an adopted grandmother who's an Anishinaabe, but that will never make me an Anishinaabe. I'm Nakota, like just plain and simple. And sorry, I feel myself rambling. I feel myself rambling at this point. So just the last thing that I really wanted to touch on, and I think this is very important, is when we talk about pretendians, when we talk about any issue, really, any issue, it's important for everybody to really be on the same page when it comes to this. And that's why it's good to start off with like essentially defining the issue that you want to talk about, so you can create that scope, right? But that's not really easy when it comes to First Nation identity, when it comes to Indigenous identity. And I think that's what makes these conversations extremely, extremely nuanced. And that's why I try to be very careful and genuinely try to come from at this topic with a good heart and with kindness, because like I said, that there are people who are biologically First Nation people but are not band members, are not status, were not raised with their community, and again for reasons that are beyond their control. And I really want to, for those folks where that is your reality, I really want to give them that space and give them that grace. But the reason why it becomes difficult is there are many different definitions that happen here. Because in Canada we have status Indians and have non-status Indians. We have people who are band. You can have people who have status but are not band members. You can have people who are band members without status. You can have people who are status without actual biological lineage. And we have the government to thank for that. When we look at people with status cards, that is a colonial system. That's not our damn system. That's a colonial system. That is the federal government stepping in and saying who is and who is not Indigenous enough. Why? Like, why? You're not a part of my damn band. Why do you have say over who is and who is not one of us? And when you look at, and when you really look at the status cards and the flaws in that of how long ago, well, really not that long ago, but when First Nation women married Wasijus, they lost their status. There goes their whole lineage. Or if they have children who would be of Indigenous ancestry, they no longer can gain status. But if a white woman married an Indigenous man at one point, she would gain status, and therefore their kids would have status, and so on and so forth. And then we have folks who, when you look at the disenfranchisement, when you look at that system, so there's in today's time in Canada specifically, we hold a lot of people accountable based on a status card, but we also have to understand that that's a flawed system and it's not our system. However, it's really one of the only kind of checks that we have at this point, so it has to do. And when we look at the topic of identity as a band member, to me, that holds a lot more weight in my mind and in my identity, is because back home on Carry the Kettle, it's band members who vote every year who is and who is not a band member. So you put your name forward or you put your children's name forward. And we only look at 2 generations. Who are your parents and who are your grandparents? If we don't recognize those names, chances are you're not going to get voted in. If we don't, and because when you only look at 2 generations, it's a bit smaller of a scope, so we can see that relationality pretty like much faster. And so to me, that means more to me that my community knows who I am. They know who my mom is. They know who my grandparents are, so they claim me as one of theirs. To me, that holds more weight. And so when it comes to Indigenous identity, yes, having a status card or a card for membership of Métis Nation Saskatchewan is great, but I think also having that ancestral line is really, really important. And that is in part why we ask each other who our parents are, who our relatives are. That it's a small part of it. I think the larger part of that question is really we just want to kind of know where people come from, because Indian country is small. It's small. If you claim to be one of the 5 nations that are here in Saskatchewan, I can ask 1 or 2 people and figure out if it's factual or not. And when you look at even with the Two-Spirit community, which of course is even smaller, we all have either know each other or we can ask 1 or 2 people and we can figure out kind of where you're from. So that's something that's kind of helpful when people falsely claim being Indigenous. If they're not naming a community, or I should say, if they're naming a community, it can be pretty easy to check that because we would know people from that community, or we know somebody who knows somebody from that community. I hope my rambling makes sense to folks. But yeah, so I guess I'll just wrap up by saying again, when we look at identity, there are different, it's a very nuanced conversation, but I think that it's really important that we have these conversations. I think it's important for people, I think it's important to distinguish the difference between I am First Nation, or I have First Nation ancestry. I think those are 2 different things, in my opinion. And I think that that's where this conversation of descendiants come from. People who wholeheartedly would say, I'm Cree, but really it was like their great-great-grandmother or great-great-grandfather who is Cree, or or it was somebody who was married into their family, but then they hold strongly to that identity. And so it's important to distinguish, do you have lived experience or lived living experience as an Indigenous person, or is it just something that you heard down the line from your family? Very important to distinguish those. And lastly, I think that sorry, I just continuing to sum up here is we really have to be mindful in today's time, when I think that it is so beautiful that a lot of our youth are looking to go back into ceremony, who are looking for their language, who are looking for their creation stories and their teachings. But it's okay to ask questions. It's okay to ask questions. Because unfortunately, that's where, in those positions where people give that information, those are the spaces where a lot of our pretendians are, in positions of power and positions of places where they won't be questioned. And so I would say that proceed with caution, essentially. And I think I'll wrap it up there. If folks have questions, we'll have a Q&A session.
Thank you so much, Jordy. That was really, really informative. And I understood all of your rambling. And you really highlighted also something that Trevino said as well, when you mentioned how don't question the elders. That was a big part of our teachings as well. Is don't question the elders. If the elders say it's okay, right? And then Trevino also said how pretendians weaponize our culture, so they will take up spaces in adoption ceremonies. And we have those types of ceremonies up here. Being adopted into an Indigenous family does not make you Indigenous. It just makes you their family. Okay, we will also, anyone has questions for Jordy, again, put them in the chat. We'll get to them after our final speaker here. Crystal Semaganis, the host of this event we're having today, and actually my auntie. And yeah, let's take it away, Crystal.
Thank you. I have to say that since the beginning of the Ghost Warrior Society, we've been up and running for about 3 years now. My favorite part is listening and having conversations with our people, because what you see as the website at ghostwarriorsociety.com, that did not come about by one person. That's a collective effort. It is people contributing and discussing and asking questions and saying, this is what happened to me. And then we learn and we expand. And a lot of my work about Pretendians is all about accountability. And I've been listening and like, yeah, that's awesome. That's amazing. And this is how we move forward. We move forward together. And today I wanted to talk about two different things, two separate concepts. And these are new things. And I'll introduce myself. So my name is Crystal Semaganis. I am from the Little Pine First Nation, Battle River Cree Nation of Treaty Number 6. I am registered to and scoop from Little Pine First Nation. I was raised in Eston and Wynyard, Saskatchewan. And I've been here in Ontario. And right now I'm on the Bear Island Reserve in Northern Ontario. And I've been here since off and on since 1991. So I have 4 children. I'm a jingle dress dancer. I'm an artist. I'm a powwow vendor. I'm a writer. I'm a poet. I'm an activist. And most people know me from the 2018 podcast Finding Cleo, which, we did in 2017 when I was looking for my sister who was lost in the 60s group. Since that podcast, I've decided to reclaim my biological name, my birth name, which is Crystal Semaganis. When I did the podcast, I was using Christine Cameron. But this brings me to my first point. So I was raised in a white family. I was raised in white privilege. But I have to say, you have to be white to benefit from white privilege. You cannot look like me and go into a white family and, be raised and go to school and do all the other things and expect to benefit from white privilege. It does not work that way. I was not permitted to benefit from white privilege, even though I was surrounded by whiteness. I was surrounded by white people and white systems. But what I did see, I was a witness to how society works for everybody else. I saw how society works for my white family. You go to a hospital, you get services. You go to a bank, you get services. You go apply for a job. I was led to believe that the world was a meritocracy. And then over time, I learned that this was not true. This is not true at all. And the most abrupt lesson I had in that was when I turned 18. And then I went to Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, and everybody was treating me like an Indigenous woman. And this is the time when my friend Neil Stonechild, died. Things like that, and then I realized society is always going to see me as a Plains Cree woman. I do not get to benefit from white privilege. Nobody cares about, like my skills, my talents, my assets, nothing like that. This is how society treats these packages of humans. This is how society compartmentalizes human beings. So that's white privilege. But let me introduce you to the concept of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit privilege. That exists when you have access to your home communities. You have access to your elders, your ceremonies, your language. That's a special kind of privilege that not everybody has, especially if you're a 60s group survivor looking to reconnect. And that's where I ran into the Pretendians. When I found out that I didn't belong with white privilege, or I didn't, I was never going to benefit from white privilege, I sought out my own people. I was, like Jordy said, I was thirsty for that. And that's where I ran into Pretendians for the first time, many, many times over many decades. And here I would find people that would, they knew I was, wanted this knowledge, and I wanted my reconnection to be reconnected. I wanted those teachings and those ceremonies and to feel like I belonged. And they took advantage of that. And over, when I was raised in my home, in my adoptive home, I suffered a lot of, sexual abuse, spiritual abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse. I suffered from that. And like most, First Nations, Métis, Inuit, we have a life of trauma, but I don't want us to be tethered to trauma. We are tethered to, poverty and these interrupted opportunities. So when I was reconnecting, one thing I did learn a lot about in my upbringing is predators and narcissism and victimology and how exploitation happens. I saw that how, society works for this one group of people, but it absolutely fails another group of people. But let's say you want to be, you belong to that group of people, you want to reconnect. That's where 60 Scoop survivors and displaced Indigenous people come in. You look at, any urban center in this country, probably only 40% of Indigenous people of any nation live in their home territory. The rest have had to leave for education, medical reasons, marriage, there's a whole number of reasons. And so they don't live in their home territory. And I am keenly aware of, displacement and its, effects on Indigenous people, because I'm a Treaty 6 Indian living in Northern Ontario, and I tell you, I'm not eligible for much. And a lot of these, programs and services are regional specific, treaty specific. And so that doesn't leave a whole lot of access. And this brings me to my second point about access and how the Pretendians have exploited these gaps. So I made my point about white privilege, First Nations, Métis, Inuit privilege. They exist, and some of us fall between. But there's another level. Here's this level of all these opportunities, these grants, these spaces that, academic institutions. There's, employment equity. There's, leadership. There's Glad You reports. There's housing. There's all of these resources created through Truth and Reconciliation. And here they are. They're just there. Access them. However, as a 60 Scoop survivor over the past, let's say, my youngest son is 17 years old, and since he's been born, I probably moved about 21 times and been in shelters probably about cumulatively, probably at least 4 years over my life. I've had a lot of, displacements, a lot of homelessness, a lot of, disparities, a lot of adversities in there. So you have all these people that need these services. This is why Truth and Reconciliation was created. I need housing, I need education, I need all these things. This is supposedly a social safety net for First Nations, Métis, and Inuit. And there it is. But why aren't these people accessing this? Boom, boom. Well, you need an address. You need internet access. You need, technology. Right now it's to the point, technology is to the point where if you don't have a smartphone, you're not getting an appointment just to open a freaking bank account. And so there is this real disconnect between the resources and the people who need those resources. There's a gap there, and Pretendians are boom, walking right through. Oh, hey, can you, I'm sure Pretendians out there, hey, I need you to apply for that arts grant. Can you whip it up for me? As somebody like me, I have to do that labor myself. And I tell you, I've applied for an arts grant, and it is a labor intensive process. I've got to get letters of support. I've got to, file formats and all this other kind of thing. That's one of the gaps that we've identified that is being exploited. Wherever there's a gap in Indian country, and this is not just specific to, Indians, like we're saying, like Métis, Inuit, of course, also, where there's a gap, Pretendians see that and they exploit it and they walk right through. And that is keenly what drives, the work of the Ghost Warrior Society. And yes, I have a very personal vested interest in identity fraud, because I see the harms that are being, suffered by our people. When I first started working with this and first started hosting Zooms and talking to people, because I've been a powwow vendor for over 30 years. And that's where we first started to notice, our own little our own little, economy. We have our products. I was, did beadwork and I did artwork. And that's how I first started meeting people, is on the powwow circuit as a vendor. And that's where we first started noticing impacts of Pretendianism and, false claims to First Nations, Métis, Inuit identity, roles, and spaces and resources that's when we first started to notice, real impacts, and it affected our bottom line too, because we were displaced, we were supplanted, we were replaced with people who had more access to these kinds of, like for instance, even just registering for a vending spot at a powwow, say. That's where we first started to notice impacts, and then it just grew and grew and grew from there. And now here in 2024, I never would have, you know, when I was a kid, I never would have thought that we would be here where people are, you know, claiming to be us, but they only like Cheyenna said, they only want the pretty stuff. They do not want, you know, the bad drinking water. They do not want, you know, like human trafficking. They don't want the drug trade and problems in law and justice and housing and child welfare and all these horrible things that also come with being First Nations, Métis, and Inuit. They don't want all that stuff. They just want the nice stuff, the stuff that puts money in their pocketbook and, you know, affects and, you know, gives them a nice bottom line. And it's this mass exploitation that drives my work. Seriously, it's this mass exploitation. And we are not a colonial entity. We are not incorporated. We don't have, you know, policies and procedures. We, as a Ghost Warrior Society, we've had this discussion many, many times over many years, and we're not a colonial entity. When we see, you know, politicians speaking to this issue or anybody speaking to this issue, it's always said, oh, it's going to be Indigenous led. And then I was looking around, there wasn't really, you know, is little, you know, there are, you know, it's a lot of labor to try to make any progress in this issue. So I thought, okay, well, let's start something. And we got together, we started talking about it. You know, what drives our nation, our people. And I tell you, those first conversations and the conversations since then, and even today, it's just really empowered me. It gave me confidence. And I am just so proud to be Plains Cree and from such knowledgeable, intelligent, articulate, amazing people. I can see why people would, you know, covet that, want that, desire that. But I also want to protect our people. You know, when I see people who want to reconnect of any age, and they're looking for a ceremony, and they're looking for teachers, and they're looking for that connection, the best place to start is with truth. You know, that's the basis of everything. You know, I love you means nothing unless it's said in truth. And we can tell when it's said in truth. And our ceremonies and our ways of being are the ways that we hold each other, how we love each other, how we hold our space, how we, you know, function in our community, in our nations, and in those spaces, we have great reverence for each other. I have great reverence for my elders and my teachers, and I really want to protect our people from the false teachers, because I have also in this, that's the other thing that I really want to stress, is that as a researcher, as an investigator, you know, I make an announcement. This person has no First Nations, Métis, or Inuit ancestry, and they've been dishonest with everybody. This is sometimes a hard truth to accept because, you know, we have an emotional connection to each other. So we have emotional connection to everybody we deal with. And when we find out that somebody has been dishonest with us, that hurts our heart because we were offering in truth. And we find that wasn't reciprocated. And that's why it's a spiritual harm to us. It's a really sacred, you know, it hurts. I've been hurt. Oh yeah, for sure. When I first found out about Beverly Santa Maria, that was absolutely crushing because as a 60 scoop survivor, I didn't have any access to my own people. All I had was Jesse from the Beachcombers and Beverly Santa Maria. And now I only have Jesse from the Beachcombers. So that was the extent of my wanting to be reconnected and loving my people. So I understand these hurts. I was hurt. I still get hurt sometimes when, you know, I'm doing these investigations. But I want you to know that also in these investigations, people come and they say, I've had interactions with this person and this thing happened and it made me feel horrible. I felt victimized. I stopped going to this place because of my interactions with this pretendian, and I didn't feel good at the time when this was happening. Please help me. And I help, and I listen to them and I help counsel them and say, hey, this is where you can go for help. This is a good teacher. I'm going to refer you to this person who is a good teacher. I know this person is, you know, they are who they say they are. You're going to get truth. And I do that and I help reconnect my people because I see what happens when false teachers are held in those sacred spaces and they have access to people. You know, exploitation happens. Exploitation and harms happen. And we cannot ignore this. And I will not ignore this. And yes, I have been villainized, but I expected that. When you make change, when you make positive change, then think about it. Pretendians have had a sustained presence in this false reality. That's all they know. That's all they know, because they've, built their entire identity around this falseness. And it must be exhausting to have to remember all those lies that they've told to maintain that frail little position where one little, where I come along and I do the math. Oh, that couldn't happen. Or they're hiding their biological families. That's a lot of trauma, even for their biological families, that they're denying. There's so many stories of harm that surround the issue of pretending, that the Ghost Warrior Society has been, we've talked to people, we've had reports from people, like not only myself, but all of our investigators and our members. We know the harm that comes from Pretendianism, and it is vast and it's impactful. We've heard from students, from Pretendian professors, like Carrie Barras's name is on my research, like that's a harm that is not necessarily circulated out in the media. So we are very much aware of all of the harms and damage and violence that comes with Pretendianism. Microaggressions, not wanting to go to a place because it's permeated with Pretendians. It's very real. It's kind of like a minefield where you're looking for the truth, and you really have to go forward with caution, because your loved ones are coming behind you, your grandchildren, your nieces, your nephews, your friends, everybody. You want them to be held in safety and sacredness. You want that for them. We want that for each other. So I'm glad that so many people are looking at our resources that we've collectively developed. I'm glad that more people are talking or having this conversation about Pretendianism and First Nations, Métis, Inuit identity throughout the formal name. And I'm so happy that the words that we are collaborating on are being used by people, and people know what Descendian is, or they know what Hokie means, or they know like all these different resources that we've, put on our website and, are trying to educate about. I'm glad these words are on our people's tongues, because part of the forward momentum, the positive growth, comes from knowing the problem, naming the issue, and then going forward. If we're all going forward with the same terms, the same understanding, being on the same page, then this is good. This is a good thing. These discussions are important. These discussions are vital to the safety and protecting our people and maintaining cultural integrity and maintaining safe spaces. And I think that's really, really super, super important, and something I'm committed to. And so even though, yes, there is villainization of anti-Pretendian activists, I think that the messages of thanks I get from people and phone calls and being seen in person at a powwow, that far outweighs any of the negative stuff. I think that we're going forward in a good way. I think that more people are talking about Pretendianism now more than ever before, and I think this is good. I think the commitment to truth and the love of truth and supporting the truth is really, what we're all about. We have a singular purpose, and we have a singular shield, and that's truth. Like if you're making friends or you're building relationships, you always start with truth, and then it lasts forever. Lies are very quick, and they might be powerful, but they're very small, and they only last for a little bit of time. So truth is a good thing. That's where all good things come from, is truth. So thank you for coming to this panel. Apologize for the technical difficulties. We're learning. Unlike the Pretendian, we will not lie for money, so we're just dependent entirely on donations. I don't have a tech whiz. It's just me. Trying my very best to provide these platforms and conquer technology to try to provide resources like this. So thank you to everybody for coming in to listening. I really, really appreciate it. So now I'm going to toss it over to Cheyenna and we'll do a question period.
Okay, question and answer period here. Thank you so much for sharing all of that, Crystal, and all of our speakers today. KJ, Trevino, Alicia, Jordy. I got like so much good information from that and good knowledge and incredible insights. So let's move on to the Q&A period. And if you're somebody who is familiar to Crystal, then we can unmute you and you can ask your question out like that, or you can just type it in the chat right now. Panelists who do want to answer a question, raise your hand or something. And let me just check the chat here. We've got a lot of thank yous in the chat. Brent Henderson said tribal law down there seems to be more acknowledged within the settler legal systems. I believe that was that was during Trevino's speaking. He also said, thank you for combining decolonization with anti-capitalism in your talk today. Sheila Nyman said, wonderful to gather and share. I must go, however, I'll listen to the recording later. Much love, my friends, all my relations. And Christy Johnson said, thank you for this session and thank you to all the speakers. Wishing you a good discussion. Okay, so we've got a question here from Shayna. Very thankful for all of your time and words today. There was a little chat about this, but wondering how allies or accomplices can stay in their lane, but also amplify your work besides money, which I know is very important.
I can answer that. A few weeks ago, we just posted the definition of ally, actually, on our website. Oh, hang on. There we go. And it was collaborative, and it's a really good, really awesome definition. So I'm just going to go over it. So a true ally is a settler who advocates, uplifts, supports, and engages with First Nations, Métis, Inuit community in their truth as a settler. Number one, without speaking over us. And number two, without speaking for us. Number three, without patronizing us. And four, without acting as a settler savior. True allies are our friends and respect our autonomy, our nationhood, our cultural protocols, our ceremony, our languages, and all tenets of First Nations Métis Inuit life and culture without interference or judgment. Allies speak up for us in spaces where colonialism is unjust and loud, and even when we are not present, and stand beside us when we perform civil actions. Allies buy our products and services and share opportunities and economy with us as equals. True allies do not support pretendians and do not punish First Nations Métis Inuit when we speak up and ask about authentication of First Nations Métis Inuit in spaces where there is settler saturation, meaning where there's a lot of First Nations Métis Inuit specific programs, resources, and funds within these areas. Number one is schools and campuses. Number two, government, particularly with Indigenous Services Canada and other government sectors that control First Nations Métis Inuit resources, especially in procurement. Number three, the public and private sector. Four, conferences, workshops, presentations, events. Five, all media, including songs, photographs, books, social media, radio, and within Truth and Reconciliation. Further, allies speak up on our behalf and back us up when we try and counter situations where pretendians have supplanted us. Allies answer the call from the Ghost Warrior Society, our affiliates, our First Nations Métis Inuit, who seek to restore truth in all manners of events, programs, services, and spaces that represent us. So what we're saying is, listen to us, see us as, because we're powerful, beautiful people, and we can speak for ourselves. We do not lead. Right now, colonialism is essentially this big cheese grater that Indigenous people are mushed through and forced to conform to colonialism in practically, the majority of our lives. From the time we get up, for even when we're, navigating our day or going about in, everyday life, we're met with colonial constructs everywhere we go. but we are not colonial people. We are not colonial people. We are First Nations, Métis, and Inuit, and we have a different worldview. We are so vital and beautiful in our ways of being. And so we want you to respect that. We don't want you to control it or market it or stifle it or silence it or try to transform it or take it and twist it and then represent it as something else that it is not. So there's a lot to this conversation, even about being an ally, but just the fact that you are here and listening and taking in these resources and have a willingness to converse and learn, that's amazing. That's absolutely amazing. And I hope my other panelists have something to add to this.
Jordy's had his hand up. Yeah.
Yeah, so something that I would like to add this that Crystal kind of touched on is, and again, something that I spoke about when I was speaking is in many cases where we have these organizations and institutions that create these Indigenous specific spaces. What I see happening a lot is when the people who are in those spaces are called into question, a lot of times those universities and organizations, what I feel is happening is that they see it as this is an Indian problem, or this is an identity problem. This is not our space to get into it because we're a settler organization, which I highly disagree with. I think that if you are creating those spaces, you are responsible for that space. You are responsible for holding accountability. And so and this is huge for universities, huge. I believe that there needs to be some sort of policy or checks and balances in place when it comes to who you're hiring, who you're giving these positions of power to. Because like I said, and like Crystal echoed, when you have people who are thirsty for that knowledge, they are in a sense in a vulnerable state. And when you put a pretendian in those spaces where the pretendians are who they're going to, that pretendian is taking advantage of that vulnerability. And so yes, it's about holding that pretendian accountable, but it's also holding the people who have created that space accountable. So I would say that would be my kind of my remarks to that, to being an ally, is you have to listen to community members. Again, there is a difference between a First Nation, Métis, Inuit person who is actively involved in their community, who live as an Indigenous person, and then there's a difference between that and somebody with Indigenous ancestry. So if community members are calling things into question, you need to listen to those community members, point blank, period.
Okay, we'll hear from Trevino next.
Yeah, I agree with everything said. I asked different folks about what do you do with this type of allyship, and it was interesting in talking with folks in TAF, Tribal Alliance Against Frauds, that they reach out to the pretendians beforehand to make them if they give up the claim, they're not going to out them, or they want to work with them and build that allyship with them. But with that is saying that their claim is false, and just putting that out there and stopping that narrative from happening and not inserting themselves into spaces or positions that they oversee other Indians doing whatever that is. And so then of course, the pretendians never say, pretendians never say die, I guess. They keep going on and pushing ahead. But I think for those folks, even if you may have family lore, I think we have to change the culture to say, where's the evidence for that claim? If there's no evidence for that claim, then stop saying the claim. So for folks who want to be allies further, yeah, I think what Jordy has said is if you have created the space that fosters this kind of relationship with Native folks, either in virtual spaces or in the real world, you're responsible for that. And also don't minimize our critiques or our information about when there's a pretendian there. Where if we're going to be cohesive in this effort to unmask and dismantle or deconstruct pretendianism, we will have to everyone come together and understanding what that actually means, because they are among us right now. This is not a new issue, and there'll be a while until we can actually change the culture around this for Native folks and for non-Native folks as well. So, I believe in the effort to educate the masses on issues, and so I don't care about getting paid about certain things. I want to educate people. That's if anything, that's all I don't have too much monetary investment in stuff, but what I do have is knowledge, and I want to share that knowledge with folks and help folks understand whatever that is to get to a better understanding of our conditions as Native folks to exist in this world, but also in light of pretendianism as a way to better understand this issue of us existing in these colonial projects. So yeah, I'm open for conversations. Let's dive into it. I share knowledge as much as I can, specifically about pretendianism in this issue. The cultural stuff, there's some other things that can or can't be shared, of course.
All right, thank you. Do we have any more questions in the chat?
I think one good thing that we could all end with is maybe all the panelists just say you could come up with one good thing, one good instruction or suggestion, recommendation for everybody going forward that would speak to reconciliation all year long. And I'll start, and I would say that asking questions is a good thing. These questions about knowing who you are and where you came from, they're not tobacco questions. They're just getting to know each other. And it's just a normal part of, like making friends and forming good relationships. So ask questions. That's my wish for everybody today. Go ahead, ask questions. You can ask questions of me or any of the panelists. I'm sure we're very open people, but yeah, ask questions. Questions are amazing and good and will save us a lot of, a lot of potential strife going forward. Questions are a good thing.
Tapwe, that's true. And somebody who is speaking the truth won't have a problem answering any of those questions. KJ, would you like to share yours?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I know that a lot of people, maybe I'm stepping outside of it, but what I've been seeing is a lot of people are getting what is misperceived as triggered by TRC and this day, and it brings a lot of emotion to everyone. And I think probably my message is really about that measurement, holding time for yourself, being kind to yourself, holding time for yourself. This particular day and everything that it represents brings a lot for every one of us, especially those of us who have family that have endured some of the hardships that come with what truth and reconciliation is all about. The other one that is kind of an interesting point would be that I think a lot of people need to be reminded about why this day exists and the hard road that was paved to get here. I started studying about the traumas of in like what we call them Indian residential schools. The 1986 or 1996, somewhere in there, it was really early on, and the researchers in those days, they were talking to our elders back in the 70s and 60s, and so this is not like this issue of this being a problem, the schools and the children being taken away. We've been talking to the government about this being a problem for over 100 years, so it's not new. There's nothing new about this. And I think that's another one to remind people that there's nothing new about this. We've been on this for a long time, and now you have to take a moment to recognize it. And that would be about it for that. And then maybe just the other part is, just as everyone's been saying here in this panel, is speak up, speak your mind. I was definitely one of those people that stayed quiet because I didn't want to be seen as an a-hole. So I just didn't didn't talk about who I thought was a fraud, I would just stay away from them. But now I think we need to speak up. You know, say your piece, and don't be afraid to say what you have to say. That's it. Thank you. Tapwe.
Hey, thank you. Trevino Brings Plenty. You can answer next.
Yeah, we don't have truth and reconciliation down here, so it's interesting to hear the potential possibility, but of course being critical in our analysis of what that may be in that process, knowing that the colonial project itself will continue to uphold itself, capitalism will continue to uphold itself. So I think it still stands true that what is maybe truth and reconciliation, more so we want control over our economies, we want control over our resources, we want control over our culture. We define who we are in the world, not just with our colonial project relationship, but beyond that as well. And so I see, and I think about the opportunity that First Nation, Inuit, Red River, Métis folks can have with folks here in the States as well, from federally recognized tribes, and building those cross colonial project lines, that we do have a shared interest in controlling our land, our resources, our cultural understanding, and collaboratively can build that kind of strength for us to better our condition. And there's nothing wrong when we see these colonial projects, the colonized coming together and say, no, we reject, and we'll push out these colonial efforts to continue to oppress us and try to continue to colonize. Because like capitalism, colonization needs continued maintenance. And what we need to do is find those weak points in the chain and continue to dismantle and agitate and destroy it. So that's what I got there. I think you're on mute.
Sorry, I heard like my kids yelling outside, so I muted myself. Thank you for that answer, Trevino, and we'll get to Jordy next. I don't think Alicia's here anymore.
For those
Yeah.
folks who stayed to the very bitter end, thank you. One thing, just to my last remarks that I want to share for folks, a takeaway here is one thing that I want to mention is like growing up in the city and going to school, and I went through what I call my angry Indian phase, and I think that I, to an extent, am still in that. I think Wasichus do trigger me a lot to this day. But we don't have these open and honest discussions. Growing up as First Nation, Métis, or Inuit people, we don't have these discussions a lot of the time, and we definitely don't have them in school about the actual truth, the actual reality of what our people have gone through, what they continue to go through today, and how our very lives on an everyday basis is being policed by policies, by laws. And we look at, again, specifically from a Two-Spirit perspective, we look at the parental rights, or the pronoun bill that happened here in Saskatchewan. Laws that are created to kind of govern our identities, whether that be our Indigenous identities, our queer identities. Those colonial laws are always there to this day. And so, but we don't have those conversations. So when we get older, old enough to actually start having these conversations, it's just like a wave of like, holy shit. Like, it's a wave of, oh my gosh, I can't, like when those facts are given to you, it could make you a very bitter person, a very angry person. And when we look at Pretendians, for me, and I'll be completely honest, a couple of days ago during the spring equinox, I had ceremony here in my home by myself because I was just feeling very antisocial that day, but I still wanted to acknowledge that day, and I prayed. And when I was getting to the end of my prayer, I prayed for myself. And as I kind of alluded to, and I won't name names at this point, but I see a very prevalent Pretendian situation happening here in Saskatchewan, happening within the Two-Spirit community, and it's really weighed on me. It's really weighed on me this past month or so, because I saw the rift that it has created within this community, where you have a lot of these young Two-Spirit people that just idolize them, that hang on to every word that they say. And then so it created this divide of the natives who know the truth, and these natives who they got their identity as to their spiritual, cultural identity from this person, therefore they protect them. That really weighed on me, to see that divide happening within our community because of one Pretendian. That really hurt. That really, really hurt, and it really affected me emotionally and mentally. And so I prayed to let it go. I prayed just to, like, please, Jordy, just let it go, because it's not me making the false claims. It's not me bringing harm upon my people. And so I just needed to do that. I needed to pray on it and to ask to let it go. And one of the symptoms that I didn't really touch on, but I'm sure we all know, is this these instances cause mistrust, and people who have similar stories like Crystal, who are 60 Scoop survivors, like people who were adopted out, they have very real stories that again, that Pretendians co-opt those stories, take those stories and use it as their own, which then, for those who are connected to community, who are privileged enough to have access to their home community and to their culture, it's hard for us to believe those stories. And we question people, and we're really hard on people. And so for the people who are actually First Nation people, who are still trying to figure out who they are, that is their right. That is their right to figure out who they are. And I know that in today's climate, they're afraid. They're afraid to ask questions. They're afraid to start digging into who they are, because they see how fast we're questioning Pretendians. They're seeing how fast we're pushing people aside who don't have the answers. And so they don't want to put themselves in that vulnerable state. And for those people, I really feel for. And so I guess my takeaway message in thinking about that is, yes, it's really shitty. It's really shitty that we have to deal with Pretendians. And yes, it is a fact that they exist. But don't let that anger guide you. Don't let that consume you. And just remember to treat people with kindness, because we don't know the reality of their story. And I'm not saying that in a way to, like, I'm not saying let's be lenient on Pretendians. That's not what I'm saying. But what I mean to say is sometimes there are actual Indigenous people who don't have those answers yet. And we have to create a space where it's safe enough for them to actually come home, to come to where they rightfully belong. I hope that makes sense. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, and I'm just going to jump in here. I want to thank Cheyenna for moderating this. Did an awesome bang up job. That's great, and really really, you know, met the adversities of getting online here. Yeah, so thank you so much, Cheyenna. All of our panelists are going to get a Ghost Warrior Society t-shirt. Watch my social media tomorrow. We're going to release the t-shirts to the general public. They're really nice. They're very nice t-shirts designed by myself. And yeah, if you have t-shirt designs or any sort of other merch ideas, by all means, send them to ghostwarriorsociety.com or myself on social media. Thank you to everybody. This has just been, I learned a lot. I love these opportunities for learning. And I'm really grateful for these opportunities for learning, because now I go forward with even more confidence and, you know, just being even more happy to be Plains Cree woman and coming from such strong, beautiful people. Absolutely amazing. So go ahead, Cheyenna, you can close this out.
Well, thank you for having me today here. I learned a lot. Also, it was really cool to hear everybody bring their own perspectives, especially hearing from across the borders, our relations across the border, the colonial border, hearing about their different types of struggles. Thank you to everybody here. Thank you for the people in attendance who took the time to listen. Thank you for people who asked questions, and everybody else just for absorbing the information. And I hope everybody moves forward in a good way. Don't forget to ask questions, and don't forget to speak up, and don't forget to take care of yourself, because this type of work is heavy. And anger and holding on to that anger, utilize it in a good way. The anger is going to always be there, because there's always going to be situations like this where Pretendians and their army will come and it'll piss us off. But remember, feel that, sit with it, but don't keep it inside you, because it's contributes to heart problems later in life. And that's it. That's our thing for today. Hi, everybody.
Oh, wait, one more little quick.
Awesome.
I see Michelle has her hand up, so we'll let Michelle McCauley, who is one of my good friends from south of the colonial border. Go ahead, Michelle.
Yeah, so one kind of closing out thought, and I've been speaking up about Pretendians online on TikTok. And one of the biggest talking points, and I'm from the States, I'm a member of the Pyramid Lake Paiute tribe. My mother is a member of the Washoe tribe of California, Nevada, but one of the things that consistently comes up, and how I call them out here in the United States, is we have a lot of the Pretendians, people who are saying they're native by DNA. They love to speak about the 60s scoop. We never had a 60s scoop ever in the United States. And so, like you said, some people may look at it and say, you're being insensitive, myself, to these people. But here in the States, we have boarding schools. All four of my grandparents went. Everybody I meet, we all have some sort of story. So I also get called out and hate videos made of myself saying that I'm invalidating people about who they are, and that a DNA test, no matter what, proves who you are. And generations back, so I'm dealing with meeting some actual real life natives here in the States in person who are thinking I'm insensitive and like, well, if someone says they're indigenous, I believe them every single time, and you're just being rude. And if they want to reconnect, I believe in reconnecting. And so I'm in this interesting space right now where myself, like I said, there's a few hate.
No worries.
Yeah. But that's just what I wanted to bring up. But one of the points of contention is always a 60s scoop, but we never had that in our United States policy. That never happened also south of the border. And it's just all these new things are coming up. So yeah, I just wanted to share a little bit about that on my side.
Thank you, Michelle. That's important to know, because these little tidbits of information really increase our ability going forward, our knowledge base, our experience base is very, very important. So watch for some more panels coming up. We'll probably have them on a monthly basis, and take some quiet time, drink lots of water, and be the strong, awesome, and resilient people we are. And if reach out to anybody who might need help today. Check in on your people. Thank you for coming. Check out ghostwarriorsociety.com. Watch for our merch drop tomorrow, and enjoy the rest of your Monday. September 30th. Truth and reconciliation. True truth and reconciliation happens all year round, not just one day. Thank you. Hi.